For your belt work today, determine if the graph shown is a function or not. Pause the video here for 5 minutes. The graph shown is a function because each x produces exactly one y. What that means is when I go and test each x value, I see it only produces one y value. Today we will learn set notation in order to write the domain and range of a function. This is important because knowing the domain and range ensures we are using the right function for the problem we are trying to solve. The domain is simply the set or list of all possible inputs, or x's. So if I'm looking at this graph to the right, I want to see what is the absolute smallest or minimum x, and what is the absolute largest or maximum x that's occurring. So because the x-axis runs horizontal, the smallest x will be the one furthest to the left. So that's this point right here. So it looks like the minimum x is -3. Now, the largest x will be the rightmost point. That is an x of +6. So I can say the domain is all x's greater than or equal to 3, less than or equal to 6, because all my x's occur in between these two numbers. Now let's take a look at range. Range is simply the list of all possible outputs, or y's. So we're going to look now at the y-axis. And we see that the y-axis runs vertically, which means my minimum y value will be the lowest y. So let me look down here, and I see that this is the minimum y. So that gives me a minimum value of -5. My maximum y value is going to be my topmost point. So I have a maximum y value of 4. All of my y's occur in between these two numbers. So I can write that my range is all the y's greater than or equal to -5, less than or equal to 4. Now let's try another example. Again, we're simply going to find the list of all possible inputs, or x's. The list of all possible inputs, which is our x's. So the x-axis runs horizontally. So the smallest x will be the one furthest to the left. So it's this point right here. So I can see my smallest x value, my minimum x value, is -5. Now my maximum x value is going to be the point furthest to the right. So that's this point right there. So I can write my domain as the list of all x's greater than or equal to -5, but less than 0. Notice I did not use less than or equal to. That's because this point right here is an open circle. That means the 0 is not included in the domain. It is all numbers leading up to 0, but not 0. So now let's take a look at range. Again, our range is our list of all possible outputs, or y's. Because the y-axis runs vertically, the smallest will be at the bottom and the largest value will be at the top. So let's take a look. I see that my largest value is -1, and my smallest value is -5. So I can write my range as all the values greater than -5, but not equal to, because it's still an open circle, less than or equal to -1, because this point is a closed circle. Now let's check for understanding. Draw lines to match each endpoint with its description and its notation. Pause the video here for 1 minute. We should have matched this closed circle to mean included, which means I will use the less than or equal to, greater than or equal to notation. This open circle means not included, which means I will just use the less than or greater than. I will not use the or equal to part. Now let's try an example together. Look at the graph below and identify its minimum x value and its maximum x value. Pause the video here for 60 seconds. Well, the x-axis runs horizontally, so the minimum x value is the lefternmost point. So that's this point right here. This point has an x value of -4, so that's my minimum. The maximum x value is the rightmost point, so that's this point right here. We see it has a maximum x value of 6. Now that you know your proper minimum and maximum, write the domain using the proper notation. Pause the video here for 1 minute. Your domain should look like -4 less than or equal to 6. Now let's take a look at our minimum y and our maximum y value. Pause the video here for 1 minute. Well, our minimum y value should be the lowest point because the y-axis runs vertically. So our minimum point is this one right here, and it has a y value of -4. So we say our minimum is -4. Our maximum y value will be the highest point. That's this point right here. It's common to use this one accidentally, but that is not the top point. This maximum point right here has a value of 5. Now that you know its minimum y value and maximum y value, pause the video here for 60 seconds while you write the range. The range should look like all the values between -4 and +5. I'm using the or equal to notation because all of my maximums and minimums were closed circles. Let's think of it in terms of directions. Fill in the blanks with the words in purple. Pause the video here for 2 minutes. The minimum x value is the point furthest to the left. The maximum x value is the point furthest to the right. That's because the x-axis runs horizontally and all the points on the left are more negative and all the points on the right are more positive. The minimum y value is the lowest point, and the maximum y value is the highest point. That's because the y-axis runs vertically, and the lower you go, the more negative the numbers get, and the higher you go, the more positive the numbers are. Now, pause the video here for 2 minutes and figure out which of the choices below best describes the domain of the function. Pay very close attention to the endpoints. We should have picked option B. It would have been easy to have picked option A, because our eye might have been drawn to these points right here. But that wasn't the end point of the line. The end point of the line was these arrows right here. That implies that it continues infinitely in the negative direction and infinitely in the positive direction. As it kept on going, it would have eventually covered all x values to the left and all x values to the right. When we see that all of the values are covered, we say that our domain is all real numbers. And the symbol we should use for that is this fancy capital R. That means all real numbers. If I wanted to identify my range using this problem, I would see the lowest y value is -4, but that my maximum I never actually hit. The endpoints just continue in the positive y direction. So I would say that my range is all of the y's greater than or equal to -4. Let's check for understanding. What is the symbol you use for domain or range when it is all real numbers? Pause the video here for 30 seconds. We should have picked B. That symbol means all real numbers. You can pretty much plug in any number you could think of into that function, whether it's a whole number, whether it's a weird decimal, or whether it's an elaborate fraction. Now, independently, select the correct domain and then write the correct range. Pause the video here for 4 minutes. We should have picked a domain of all real numbers because these endpoints tell me I'm going to continue in both the negative direction, eventually hitting all x values, and continues infinitely in the positive direction, eventually hitting all positive x values. For the range, you need to identify the minimum and maximum point. These endpoints tell me there never is a minimum. I just continue infinitely in that direction. But I have a maximum of +4. So my range should be all values less than or equal to +4. In 2 to 3 sentences, summarize what you've learned using the sentence stem, "Today I learned." Pause the video here for 3 minutes while you reflect. If you answered questions 1 and 2 right on the last slide, you are Tier 1. You will begin by writing the domain and range and interpreting it in context. If you only answered question 1 correct, you're Tier 2. You will begin by selecting the correct domain and range, and then move on to the Tier 1 task. If you didn't answer any of the questions on the last slide correctly, you are Tier 3. You're going to begin by matching domains and ranges to their graphs.